Okay, last thing we talked about was the Olive Branch Petition in July of 1775. This was the final attempt to avoid war with King George. So it was an attempt to appease him. Um, it failed. The colonists attempted to have this two-pronged plan. They thought before war actually starts, we'll try to, uh, basically win the war before it gets going. Their two-pronged plan was basically to take Quebec in the up in Canada. The other part was to go take Montreal. Americans tried to invade Canada. They thought that the French would just want to get rid of the British and help out. But the problem was the French were happy. They were fine with what they had. We talked about the Quebec Act that gave the French more territory. It actually gave Catholics a lot of freedom. And so it was a huge loss for Americans, not very well thought out, and it was a major downfall of the early parts of the American Revolution. So, what were the two big breaks that led to changes for the war? What led to eventual American victories? Well, the British hired Hessians, and they did have a immediate effect for the British. Hessians were German soldiers of fortune. They were known for their very vigorous fighting, their violent fighting, and they did help out a lot in some of the early major battles. But eventually, a lot of these Hessians actually deserted and became U.S. citizens. Even after the war, thousands of them decided to stay because it was better than sort of living back in their nation states over there in Germany. Another big change was Thomas Paine, an author. He wrote Common Sense in 1776. He wrote it anonymously. And in this pamphlet, he challenged British government in a very plain tongue. And that's the most important part, is that these ideas that Thomas Paine had were not unique. They were not original, but they were never available for the common man. So he spoke to the masses and had a lot of great ideas that would influence Thomas Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And he really sort of laid plain what was going on and why Americans needed to fight back and gain some sense of liberty. Here's a painting of Thomas Paine. One of my favorite quotes of his is, "My own mind is my own church." He had a lot of simple phrases like that made people think and were finally available to the common man. Okay. Some other ideas of Thomas Paine: nowhere in the physical universe does a smaller body control a larger one. Makes sense. Why is this small little British island attempting to control America? He called for a new political society. And really, what Thomas Paine did was he combined his political theories with propaganda and got a lot of support in the American colonies. Power comes from the people. It does not come from a king. Not new ideas, but they fell on fresh ears. Again, these are the common people finally hearing these. John Adams said of Common Sense, "Tolerable summary of arguments which I have been repeating over and over again in Congress for 9 months." Again, repeating that these are not fresh ideas, but finally they're available for the common man. So the opposing pamphlet at the time to Common Sense was something called Plain Truth by James Chalmers. You can definitely see how Thomas Paine's Common Sense is going to influence the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson even says of Common Sense, he says, "I turned to neither book nor pamphlet while writing the Declaration of Independence, but I wanted to place before mankind the common sense of the subject." Okay. And of course, Thomas Jefferson had helped write the Virginia Bill of Rights in June of 1776, and this becomes the basis for our Bill of Rights, and obviously the opening of the Declaration of Independence. We're going to skip these for now. We'll come back to these: Lee Resolution and Writings of European Political Philosophers, John Locke. There's some more important slides coming. So let's talk about the Enlightenment of the 18th century. It's also known as the Age of Reason or Enlightenment. The idea that by using human reasons could manage themselves in society without depending on authorities. And so some major people we get from the Age of Enlightenment long before, well, not really long before, but before the American Revolution, people like John Locke, he's 1632 to 1704, scientists like Isaac Newton, Montesquieu, who's going to be a major political thinker of the time. These are all philosophers who are going to shape our Declaration of Independence and shape our government to come. Okay, and these philosophers are not interested in religion or God. They're interested in the state of life on earth. And by using reason, humans can progress. Like I said, they had very little interest in the supernatural or afterlife. They wrote about science, ethics, or government rather than religion. Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and Thomas Paine were major believers in this particular movement. And the difference in America is that in Europe, you couldn't test these ideas about freedom. You couldn't create a new society. So America kind of becomes the laboratory to experiment on these enlightened ideas of the Age of Reason. Again, John Locke, 1632 to 1704. One of his more famous writings was something called Two Treatises in Government, where he justified the glorious rebellion in England. So again, we're going to be using John Locke as reasons to rebel, reasons to fight for a just government. Again, he was an English philosopher and wrote about the state of nature. Man is by nature free, equal, and independent of each other. Natural man, each man has possession of his own body. This reminds me of that Thomas Paine quote I told you. Thomas Paine, obviously influenced by John Locke, my own mind is my own church. And it gives us ideas of ownership. Okay. When man applies labor to land, he transforms what is formerly common into his own private property. In order to protect themselves and hard-won possessions from attack by wicked individuals, men would agree to a social compact to end complete independence that existed in the state of nature. This idea that we're going to sacrifice some liberties for benefits gained by everyone when we cooperate. Okay? These are ideas that are going to sort of form as the ideas of liberty and the ideas of working together for that liberty and independence from Great Britain. Other ideas of John Locke, and to form a society under the supervision of government to protect life, liberty, and property. Sound familiar? Okay. Governments were instituted by the consent of the governed for a definite purpose. Also sounds familiar. If any government fails to fulfill that purpose, it should be replaced by one that will. Sounds very familiar. Okay, I think Thomas Jefferson may have echoed some of these same phrases in the Declaration of Independence. Okay. It's important to understand that John Locke did not specify which type of government was the best, whether it was a monarchy or a democracy. Government is a trustee. The government is supposed to just do its job as dictated by the needs of the governed. Okay. It's important to understand some of his ideas are what Americans were already doing. Okay. When he talked about protecting your private property, many Americans had already experienced applying labor to this wilderness and turning it into their own. Some had even participated in social compacts, setting up new governments in the wilderness where there was no government. We talk about the Mayflower Compact. So these are all ideas that Locke has come up with long before the American Revolution. People are sort of enlightening themselves thanks to Thomas Paine. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is that John Locke saw that it was the government's duty to protect natural rights. Americans saw British government as exceeding its power and authority. And these ideas were very familiar to the educated, but again, Thomas Paine is going to help educate the masses. And these ideas are directly seen in the Declaration of Independence, which we're going to get into right now.